Hello and welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Temple Ashaju. Coming up on the show today, South Africa's credit growth slows to 5.12% year-on-year in July. Kenya's central bank to rule on 2020 dividend issuance by banks. And of course, Africa Telecommunication Union launches competition to support young African innovators to combat COVID-19. Well, let's get the show started now with the markets. And of course, major markets we track here on Channels Television, knowing, of course, all the ones we have in Africa were all negative at intraday, with South Africa's JSE shedding the most by 0.30%. And of course, Nigeria's main index reversed gains and was down marginally by 0.06%. Now, the EGX 30 in Egypt declined some 0.13%, while Kenya closed positively on Friday. It's a similar picture in the Middle East, where major markets were mostly negative, except the market in Saudi Arabia, which was up some 0.20% at intraday. Now, on the flip side, the Qatari index shaved off 0.78%. And of course, on the UAE, Dubai's main index declined 0.72%, while Abu Dhabi's index lost some 40 basis points. European stocks were higher today as dovish U.S. monetary policy signals give some kind of a boost to global risk assets. Now, let's join Chelsea Dulani at Frankfurt Stock Exchange for more on this particular issue. Chelsea, thank you for joining us on the program this time. And of course, it's the last trading day of August. Now, we've seen the fact that some big banks, of course, are trying to make some moves on the other side. We know that the S&P 500 have also reached new all-time highs. How's the DAX trading at this point in time in Frankfurt?
So the DAX started out a bit higher. It's losing some steam throughout the day. It's basically flat now, but it has been a really extraordinary month for the global stock market, the DAX included, but global stocks have risen about 7% since the end of July. It's the best month for global stocks since the 1980s. So we are seeing stocks rise to new records. We're seeing stocks basically erase all of the amount that they lost throughout the coronavirus. The DAX here in Frankfurt has recovered most of its losses from the coronavirus sell-off, but it still isn't at a new record. It's about 5% away from a new record. But traders say that the conditions still are quite good for global stocks, even though we're facing an unprecedented economic slowdown, even though there's still so much uncertainty about the outlook because of the timeline for containing the virus, the timeline for vaccines. All of that is very much a public health question, but also an economic question. But as you mentioned earlier, monetary policy from the Federal Reserve, from the European Central Bank is very, very loose still, and that's very supportive for stocks going forward. And we have seen some tentative signs of the economy starting to pick up around the world as these lockdown measures continue to be lifted.
That's something actually seemingly peculiar to a lot of economies across the emerging markets and, of course, the frontier markets. But, of course, we know that China has also introduced new restrictions on the export of technology that could hinder the looming sale of the U.S. arm of popular app TikTok. What are the new restrictions that we know about at this point?
So China announced these new rules on Friday evening, and they target a lot of different technologies. It's a very long list of things that are now going to be subject to export control by the Chinese government. But why this really matters is that it's going to hit some very, very valuable Chinese tech. So things like algorithms, content recommendation algorithms, speech recognition technology, all of that. Now companies in China that are trying to send that technology to their overseas subsidiaries, to other companies, that's going to have to be approved by the Chinese government. And this really matters right now because ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, is trying to sell its U.S. business to a U.S. company. That's, of course, because the Trump administration has threatened to ban the app if TikTok isn't sold in the U.S., but it likely will mean that ByteDance, as it goes through the sale, it's going to have to get approval from the Chinese government as well. So the Trump administration has given ByteDance until the middle of September to strike a deal for these U.S. operations. Now that the sale is going to have to be approved by Beijing, that could certainly lengthen this timeline and make this potential deal much more complicated.
Chelsea, I'll let you know that Wirecard has been in the news in recent time, but we know that the German Parliament's Finance Committee is holding a special two-day session on the scandal surrounding the bankrupt of the financial tech company. What are the expectations at this point?
So there have been a couple of these parliamentary hearings over the Wirecard scandal in the past couple of months. So after Wirecard basically turned out to have a massive accounting fraud, there were a lot of questions about why this wasn't caught by German regulators, why these warning signs had been ignored by both the financial ministry here and also the banking regulator BaFin. So we've seen some of these regulators, some of these politicians questioned. But today's hearing is quite important because it could lead to a much bigger investigation on the political scale. So one of the things that's going to be discussed is whether they should open a parliamentary inquiry into what went wrong at Wirecard, and that would be a very big escalation on the behalf of Parliament. It would allow this committee to basically act like a court in investigating what went wrong. They could call witnesses. They would be able to fine people if they decline to testify. So it would be a much stricter and a much more intense investigation. And it does appear that the members of Parliament have the votes that they need to call for this. So that could really drag this financial scandal into the political realm as well.
All right, Chelsea Delani, thank you so much for joining us on the program. And let's hope that whatever comes out of this meeting will put Wirecard on a survival line. Thank you so much for your time. Let's move on now to the United Kingdom, where in the UK, markets are closed for the bank holiday. But let's talk to Juliana Olayinka, my colleague, who's found a way to join us somehow on the program and on duty this afternoon. Juliana, thank you for joining us today on the show.
Nice to see you presenting, Temple.
Great, thank you. So, Credit Suisse has now applied for a license to set up an investment bank in Madrid. And of course, this is coming after the EU's bank watchdog, I guess that's the ECB, now told banks using Britain as a gateway to the EU to fully execute their plans for serving the European Union customers before a Brexit transition period ends in December. So what does this entail for Credit Suisse, and of course, are there other banks that are applying for the same license?
Well, there are several other banks that have set up financial hubs across Europe, some of them being in Frankfurt, Paris and elsewhere. And really what's happened is that, of course, Britain have departed the European Union, and on the departure, they're no longer going to have access to European financial markets. And the EU regulator and watchdogs have asked firms that are headquartered in London to basically get their house in order before the transition period ends on December the 31st, and Credit Suisse are amongst many others. And Madrid seems to be the right place for them. This was first reported by a Spanish news agency over the weekend, and Credit Suisse have now confirmed that they will indeed be moving to Madrid. We know that 50 employees are already there. And what these banks really want is continuity. Of course, London is the financial centre, but we're not sure whether or not a deal will be struck between Brussels and Downing Street. And so they're just preparing their customers for a financial European-focused model.
Right. So we know that the next round of negotiations for the post-Brexit trade deal between the United Kingdom and, of course, the European Union will begin in a week's time. And we know that an agreement is meant to be reached before the end of the year. As it is right now, any idea what could pose as some kind of a stumbling block, like a cog in the wheel for this meeting?
Oh, goodness me, Temple. There are so many. I wouldn't want to bore viewers, but there are some significant stumbling blocks. And really, it's the level playing field. That's what the chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, is trying to push forward with Sir David Frost, who, by the way, has told Prime Minister Boris Johnson that perhaps there could be no deal if the Brussels don't back down. And what Brussels basically want is they want Britain to align to some EU rules and regulations which will determine and allow European-focused businesses to not receive lesser treatment in Britain for those that are owned nationally. And so those are causing various issues because, of course, hard Brexit supporters didn't want that. They don't want to be aligned with Brussels in any way, shape or form, particularly when it comes to fishing. Fishing is a major issue because the EU member states still want access to roam into British waters. So there are several. This week or next week, there will be preliminary rounds of negotiation, and then the hard talk will happen in the week following that.
And finally, we know that the fee for plastic shopping bags in England will be doubled to about 10 pence or thereabouts and extended to all shops from April 2021. Now, what are Britons saying exactly about this, and how friendly is this for the environment?
Well, it's very friendly to the environment. It's actually been going for about 5 years now, believe it or not, where if you shop in Britain into a major shop, because small shops are still giving a supply of free plastic bags, but if you go into a major shop, you have to pay 5 pence for a bag. Now, before Britain put on this plastic tax, in 2014, 147 bags were used by one person. And according to last year's figures and statistics, that's been reduced to about 9 bags. And so Britain really want to be seen or position themselves as well in trying to prevent plastic pollution and the ruining of our seas and waters. So they are going to increase it by 10 pence. The BBC were reporting that a lot of members of the public are backing the government and are putting their stamp behind them, because what they're trying to urge people to do is to reuse plastic bags, or more preferably is to invest in these lifesaver bags. So these bags that are made out of material, excuse me, it can be used for a much longer time. So yes, it's going to be taking place next week. People across England will be paying 10 pence to use a plastic bag, Temple.
This is a welcome development across Europe. I know that. Thank you so much, Juliana Olayinka. Let's move on now to other parts of the market and chew more numbers, where, of course, Asia shares in Asia Pacific were mixed today, with Japan stocks leading gains among the region's major markets as investors monitored political developments in the country. Now, mainland Chinese stocks shared earlier gains to sleep on the day, with the Shanghai Composite down some 0.24% to about 3,395.68, while the Shenzhen component shed 0.672% to around 13,758.23. Now, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was down 0.13%, and of course, as of its final hour of trading, while South Korea's Kospi fell by 1.17% to close at 2,326.17. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 gained 1.12% to close at 23,139.76, while the Topix Index advanced some 0.83% to end its trading day at 1,618.18. Meanwhile, the ASX 200 in Australia dipped 0.22% to finish its trading day at 6,060.50. Overall, the MSCI Asia ex-Japan index slipped some 0.72 points. Let's take a break now, and when we come back, we'll give you more stories across Africa. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. This is Business Incorporated. Well, data from the South African Reserve Bank shows that growth in private sector credit slowed to 5.2% year-on-year in July from a revised 5.63% in June. Expansion in the broadly defined M3 measure of money supply slowed to 10.46% in July from a revised 11.06% in June. Meanwhile, one of South Africa's biggest steel producers, ArcelorMittal, South Africa, has declared force majeure after a breakdown of a blast furnace at its Newcastle works in KwaZulu-Natal province. Now, this comes as ArcelorMittal said the demand for steel was at its lowest before the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown, and it was difficult to hit exports as the government around the world enforced measures to contain the spread of the virus. Now, speaking to Channels Television, the operations director at Stos Bigby, manufacturer of water-cooled copper, Isaac Mogoba, says most economies are in contraction, a situation that is responsible for the reduced demand.
The global view of steel market it's negative, obviously, because most economies are in contraction. I mean, the biggest consumer, even the supply, China, is being in contraction for the last 3 quarters, obviously exacerbated by COVID-19. But if we bring it into our local context, it's even gloomy. We have seen over the past 2 months, companies like Mittal are downsizing, restructuring, because there's no demand. And that demand will only derive if we fast track the development in terms of infrastructure. So that's what the governments ought to do in order to boost that demand for steel. That's why the construction companies, your big 3 companies, Group 5, Greenacre, Basel Reed, they are also restructuring as a result of not seeing the big projects coming through. And those projects is the same projects which we're banking on to reduce the rate of unemployment, because construction has the benefit of employing a large number of people than any other industry. So if those infrastructure development aren't coming through, the demand for steel is not going to be there. Exacerbated obviously by the global outlook in terms, negative outlook in terms of China, which is in contraction.
And a bit now about technology. The Africa Telecommunication Union has launched the ATU Africa Innovations Challenge to identify and support young African innovators who have developed useful mobile applications to contain COVID-19 and possibly other emergency situations in Africa. Now, the ATU Innovation Challenge is an initiative that seeks to provide both short and long-term solutions and opportunities to the African youth. With increased suppression of the social fabric in many communities in Africa as a result of COVID-19, and considering the fact that a large population of Africa are youths, the competition promotes the idea that the ability for countries' readiness for digital solutions could significantly help address some of the challenges. Now, Kenya's central bank says it will have to approve any plans by commercial lenders to issue dividends for this year, an annual move caused by the coronavirus crisis. Now, lenders in the East African nation have seen their earnings plunge in the first half of this year, hit by higher provisions for bad loans on the back of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, they have also had to restructure more than a quarter of total customer loans to provide relief to individuals and firms hit by the disruptions. The central bank says all lenders are required to resubmit their internal capacity adequacy assessments by the end of October, reflecting the impact of the pandemic. And locusts continue eating everything in sight in Turkana, Kenya's poorest region, with swarms able to travel up to 130 kilometers in a day. Numbers of locusts exploded in East Africa and the Red Sea region in late 2019, exacerbated by atypical weather patterns and climate change.
The livelihood of agro-pastoralists in Turkana County, Kenya, has been greatly affected by the ongoing desert locust infestation, where up to 20% of crops were damaged in areas where the pest was present. In addition to controlling the desert locust infestation, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is responding to the impacts of the locust on the livelihoods of affected communities to ensure they get fully back on their feet. In Turkana County, people's livestock are competing for pasture with billions of hungry hoppers. As a result, goats are not producing enough milk to feed their families. Anna Amarai, a pastoralist, says she used to get 8 jugs of goat milk, but now only gets 1 from her goats.
We now have to collect milk over several days, then add water to make enough tea for the children.
Pastoralists are worried that there won't be enough pasture for their livestock as the dry season approaches.
I know if the desert locusts disappear and God gives us a little bit of rain, we will have pasture. But if it does not rain for more than 1 month and the hopper bands are finished, all the pasture available, the livestock, will suffer and die from hunger and disease.
In Kenya, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization has trained hundreds of National Youth Service trainees as part of plans to boost the government surveillance and control the worst desert locust infestation the country has seen in 70 years. Over 600,000 hectares of land have been covered across East Africa so far, and about 500 billion locusts have been killed in the entire region. But even then, the threat of possible reinfestation towards the end of the year remains, and continued surveillance will be needed. From June to December, many more people in East Africa could become severely food insecure due to the desert locust alone.
It was dark.
My thinking is that if we could get well-wishers up with our government, because at the farmer level, they can't make it. We get aid from well-wishers with our national government, county government, and see how we can eradicate this pest, because it's a threat to humanity. Yes, a threat to humanity.
Aid from well-wishers.
Turkana, Kenya's poorest region, is a vast dry scrubland in the northwest that borders Uganda, South Sudan, and Ethiopia.
And let's chew more numbers. Oil prices were higher in early trades today as global stimulus measures underpin prices, even as demand struggles to return to pre-COVID levels. In a well-supplied market, Brent crude futures for November climbed 0.6% to $46.08 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was at $43.11 a barrel, up 0.3%. Brent is set to close out August with a 5th successive monthly price rise, having peaked at $46.23 a barrel on August the 5th, the highest level since March this year. And gold jumped earlier today as the United States dollar weakened and the United States Federal Reserve signaled a prolonged low interest rate strategy. Spot gold rose 1.9% to $1,964.62 per ounce, taking gains to more than 1% so far, while U.S. gold futures rose 0.2% to $1,936.30. Now, silver eased 0.1% to $27.01 per ounce, and platinum fell 0.7% to $922.07, while palladium gained 0.8% to close at $2,178.48, I should say. And that's the program for today. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Temple Ashaju. See you next time.